I going live now. Okay.
Are we
And
live?
Timo, yeah, my suggestion is us to wait for us to show up in the YouTube. So you will
And then you
start
tell me.
because
Okay.
otherwise we will just keep
W-
starting. And now it's on.
All right, we are on. We thought we'd give you a little bit of suspense and you chatting about how the Italians and the Portuguese are always late. Well, we are. Not because we wanted to, but because technology works its magic sometimes. Anyway, welcome everyone. This is a live event with the collaboration between Cultural Global Labs in the US, Portland, Oregon, and Differance in São Paulo, Brazil. Bem-vindo a todos no Brasil. É uma honra de ter este live com profissionais com uma paixão pela comunicação intercultural e pela diversidade intercultural. I wanted to sprinkle a little bit of Portuguese here and there because we'll be talking about silenced narratives inside multiculturalism. And guess what? We often don't realize how much language is a silent narrative in itself. Because imagine all of those people for whom English is a second language. I am one of them. And how we always have to speak in English, communicate in English, but that's not necessarily our innate way of expressing ourselves. And therefore, maybe we are good enough to contribute to the conversation, but are we really coming through in all of our identities and our comfort? So that's why sometimes language can be a hidden narrative. Today on the panel, we have three amazing speakers and myself moderating the call. I'm Antimo Cimino, the Chief Visionary Officer of Cultural Global Lab. And we have Mariana Barros from La Difference with Adrienne Sweetwater from Difference. And then accompanying me as well from Cultural Global Lab is Marcia Warren Edelman. And instead of introducing them to you, I'm going to simply have them share a story about themselves. And before I move on, remember that if you have questions as they come up, to put them in the live chat, and then we'll get them toward the end summarized for you, and then we'll have a Q&A. So, Mariana, why don't you take it from here?
Hello, everybody. Hello, Antimo. What a pleasure to be talking to you all this Brazilian afternoon. So, I am Mariana Barros, as Antimo just said, Brazilian. We're here to talk about identity, so I should start talking about my identity as an interculturalist. And I would say that today, for me, the most important layer of my identity is that I have maybe the most unnatural English of the group. Talking about language, I feel a little behind, but I'm very honored and I'm very glad to be able to talk about this subject, talking about how we who do not speak English as first language are sometimes behind, even in the intercultural field. What else? I'm from the countryside of Brazil, which you probably know the word caipira, which is also a very important layer of my identity. I'm also a lesbian, gay, homosexual, as you wish, in Brazil. And I've been married for 8 years now. And the great news is that we are pregnant. My wife is expecting and twins. First time I'm saying this online. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's absolutely
Her,
awesome.
what else? And I've been an interculturalist for 20 years now. Although in Brazil we do not have formal education in the field, so I had my graduation, my bachelor in international relations, and then I had my master also in international relations. But I've been working as an intercultural consultant for 20 years. Well, I think that's a lot already from my side. So, what about you, Marcia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcia Warren Edelman, coming to you from Boulder, Colorado. And I'm so happy to be part of this wonderful group for a number of reasons. One is because this is an issue so dear to my heart, professionally and personally. So my background is that personally, my My mother is from Brazil. She's from the town of Marília in the state of São Paulo. So bem-vindo a todos. Hopefully some family members are watching today. So hello, oi, oi, oi. And my father is Native American, and I'm an enrolled member of my tribe, Santa Clara Pueblo, which is located in the state of New Mexico in the United States. And I grew up going in between all those different cultures, but being brought up mainly in the United States. So, that's really where my passion for multiculturalism, for intercultural communication started. Professionally, I'm in my second career as a therapist. I'm a somatic therapist, which means it's body-based psychotherapy. And I'm also a trainer, and I do a lot of work around multicultural identity, intergenerational trauma, and a model that I've been working on myself that I created called embodied code switching. So switching between identities, but being fully aware of the impact of what that is, not just on your mind, but on your body and on the way you communicate non-verbally. So this is a very rich topic today. Hidden narratives are all around us in this field, and I'm really looking forward to diving in and talking about this with everyone. So, and also as part of Cultural Global Labs, I am a founding partner and so pleased to be working with Antimo and working again with our intercultural community. So I'd love to pass it on to Adrian. Adrian.
Thank you so much, Marcia. It's wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you for the invitation and for everybody who's watching and supporting us. My name is Adrian Sweetwater. In Brazil, I go by Adri. So I have learned to already have a nickname in Brazil. It helps people say my name better, and I love both names, so it works well. My intercultural journey began when I was a kid, when I was 10 years old, and my two very adventuresome parents took me to Ecuador for 6 months. And while it was a short amount of time, it was a very immersive amount of time. And so when I came back to the United States, I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado. And when we returned, I never felt 100% American or North American again. So started to realize that I had some TCK or third culture kid qualities, although I didn't know what the term was at the time. And that started me off on my intercultural journey. In 2009, I had my first contact with Brazil. I did a foreign exchange program that was social justice based in the northeast of Brazil in Fortaleza, in the neighborhood of Pirambu, which is in the periphery. And I learned Portuguese really at the kitchen table with my Brazilian host mom, Vanya, and with my Brazilian sister, Valesca, and cousin, Lala, who may or may not be watching too. So, but that got me started in that was the first time I really had a deeper living experience in Brazil, and got me so curious about Brazilian culture and kind of on this mindset that I was needed to spend more time here and make my life here. And it's taken a while, but I've made my way back. And in those process along those years, I also came out within the LGBTQ community. So I identify as a queer interculturalist, which I'll be talking about a little bit more later on. But they are intricately connected for me. So it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invite, Antimo. Thank you, Marcia. And I'll pass it on to you, Antimo.
Well, wonderful, beautiful stories. And the more I think we get close to our identity, our true self, the more we create inspiration by telling our own story and the layers within our own stories, right? So for me, Southern Italian, I left Italy for the first time traveling to France at the age of 16. And that was the beginning of the travel bug and the intercultural bug, if you will. I'm 48 today. I've been in the US for 25 years. I identify as a Southern Italian, gay man. And here in the US, the other identity that I have that is with me at the entire time, even after 25 years, and even after becoming an American, is the one of an immigrant. So today we'll be talking about this beautiful subject that it is not meant to be taking over the conversation that is going on right now around the globe by any means, but it's simply saying that we need to be more conscious about having conversation of all kinds of diversity, and not only when for one reason or another outside of our circumstances or around the globe, we need that band-aid, we need that conversation to be had because some event is happening. I think it's very safe to embrace the idea that we have to have this conversation ongoingly, okay? So why don't we start with ourselves? Why don't we look at what do we have as an example of our own silence narratives that we can share, right, from our personal experience? So I go back to Mariana to see if you can share one or two examples that are pertinent to this conversation.
Sure, Antimo. I was very glad when you suggested this conversation and this topic, because this is something that has been following my entire life. I think the first thing is that I major in international relations, which usually in Brazil is an important major. It goes to diplomacy, to politics. And then suddenly in the second year of graduation, I chose to be an interculturalist, and nobody ever gave this any value. So I think this is the first silent narrative that followed me my entire life, because I had to prove myself to my parents. My father came, how come you were, no, you're majoring in international relations. What does an interculturalist do? And then not only my father, but also my colleagues from university. I think that only now they are starting to understand that I'm not a nanny for expats. I have no problems with nannies, but I'm not taking care of expats in this sense. That's not my job. And I wanted to be recognized for that. That is the first maybe silence narrative I had to deal with, and which also comes with this imposter syndrome. That
Absolutely.
I had to prove myself so much that in the end I doubt myself. In the sense that does what I do really exist? Is it really important? And then having proof, and it comes all together. I think that is, although I was an interculturalist, I can say a well-succeeded one in Brazil, I was not really relevant for the world. I would come to conferences in the US and in Europe, to intercultural conferences where people should be aware of power and cultural differences. And I don't feel I had the space. Maybe a little bit of a pity space, but not a relevant space. People were not really trying to hear what I was saying, to listen to what I was saying, because I didn't have a PhD, for instance, or a European or American PhD. So I would say those are the two layers.
And is that changed in the last year or so? Do you feel something is changing because now people are listening more? There is enough around the globe that it's forcing us to pay more attention?
For sure, it's changed in Brazil in the sense that now I see friends from university coming to me and asking me, so what is actually interculturalism about? I'm interested. I saw this somewhere, like United Nations is working with this now. So people are starting to recognize it, but not necessarily in the word. I was in conferences last year, and I felt the same feeling of, you from Latin America, you do not take this in a formal way.
When we are with our colleagues, when we go to conferences, we feel at home, right? We feel that we understand each other, but we don't question quite enough that if we are understood, if the field is building bridges, and enough bridges and quality bridges to really bring new relevance to the world of intercultural and how it relates to all aspects of life, right? So let's hear about from Marcia, and what in Marcia's experience are some of those hidden narratives or silence narratives in her life.
Antimo, it's perfect what you just said, because that was really on my mind as I was listening to Mariana speak. She and I share something similar. I also did an international relations degree as my first degree, because that's the closest thing I could get to intercultural communication, which back in the 90s didn't exist, really, not really as a degree program that I knew of. So I was always searching for what I felt should be a focused look on how to hold different identities, and, coming to where I am now, I realize that that's been a profession in progress for many, many years, as it has been a concept in progress around the world. So what I'm trying to say is that even within the intercultural community, the very fact that folks are multicultural, now that's two different things, right? Is a silenced narrative. In a lot of gatherings, you'll see folks identifying predominantly with one ethnic or racial group, right? But when you start getting into the different layers of identity that all of us hold, there's not a lot of space for that. And it almost feels like a long run-on sentence when you start to try to bring that into any kind of learning environment. And it's complicated, as it should be. That's the beauty of it, right? Yeah. But because of that, I think a lot of those experiences, and in particular, I think for me, I found both the indigenous perspective to be lacking in the intercultural community, and also the immigrant voice to be lacking in the intercultural community, because the dominant cultures that created the fields were US and Europe predominantly, and then Japan comes to that too. So, within these overarching communities in the United States and in many countries, you have different cultural groups. You have different groups that represent, sexual orientation, gender, ability, age, intersectionality is the term for that, right?
Yeah.
That's the silent narrative. How do we bring intersectionality into intercultural communication?
Yeah, yeah. And it's surprising to me that my experience when you ask somebody from the US about their culture, or they're commenting about somebody else's culture, their self-reflection is, oh, we have no culture, which is, it hurts to hear, because it shows that there isn't a deeper understanding of what actually culture means, and what those intersectionality and those layers of that, by the way, they tend to switch place. The relevancy of our layers switches places with the context in which we find ourselves. And that's the other hidden narrative, to be honest, that is perhaps more hidden to the person that is experiencing, but not obviously to ourselves.
Yeah, I think what you bring up is a really interesting point, because the intercultural communications field, I believe, is all about understanding. So that's sort of a reaching towards, let me understand you, right? Whereas the marginalized community perspective, and what I mean by that are those groups that don't have the strongest voice, it's really about recognition and respect, right? Yeah. Don't use my cultures as a way to appropriate learning. Really see me in the space, and let's make this a two-way street.
Yeah. Well, what about Adrienne? What do you have to contribute from your own experiences in this particular dialogue?
Yeah, so, I didn't tell this other part of my story, which is that my first job after college was getting to work at the Intercultural Communication Institute, getting exposure to the Summer Institute, and sequentially attending the master's program in intercultural relations through ICI and University of Pacific. And it was an incredible access point to the core of intercultural communication and learning. And for so many people, theory, exactly. And for the founders of the field, and having languaging for some of the experiences that I had as a child, and also during my time living in Northeast Brazil, that I hadn't been able to articulate before. So it was really an incredible opening, massive part of my intercultural journey. And I also believe that Brazilian cultural intelligence goes beyond what all of those theories and terminologies, and has a lot more to offer than what is in the textbooks. And so it sort of became a calling for me to figure out how I could be a bridge point between these two points of knowledge and these two very rich areas. what I talk about how Brazilian cultural intelligence, it operates at a different frequency. It's a different connection. And there were a few points that I started to realize and has taken me time to get access to, and I still don't know it as well as Mariana, for example. She helps me all the time. But one is about, recognizing that Brazilians have a very acute awareness and acceptance to others' emotional states and well-beings. And this is, and they know what to do in general. They know how to act accordingly. It's an extraordinarily high level of emotional intelligence that is such a rich part of living in Brazil, and is something that, coming from a very dualistic culture that tends to think in black and whites and binaries in the US, I didn't have access to as a child as much. So that's been a huge richness. And another aspect of Brazilian cultural intelligence that I have seen over the years is this ability to use the creative power of spontaneity. So it took me a long time to move away from having an efficient mindset of planning and organization and, really valuing that future thinking, towards opening yourself up to what can happen in those imprevistos, in those moments of uncertainty and ambiguity, and realizing that that is how everything operates in Brazil. And if you're not willing to learn that, you're not going to get very far here. And I think, there's some initial starting points that the field has to talk about this type of cultural intelligence, relational societies versus task-oriented, or collectivist versus individualistic, but it goes so beyond that. And I think particularly at this point of time that we find ourselves in, where we need to get away from a polarity type of thinking, us and them. It's such the time to take advantage of and to open up to other types of knowledge that have a holistic way of seeing the world and acting with one another.
Yeah, I think that polarity is actually created that desire for more as well. Not that it's a common experience just yet. I think polarity is what we're experiencing more of. But we've been in polarity mode for so long that people are finally opening up to more. And also, the racial movement, if you will, it's not going to stop anytime. And I hope it doesn't stop anymore at all until we start seeing those differences we really want to see in our communities around the globe. Well, Mariana, we would love to hear from you if there are other examples of narratives that are being silenced in the intercultural field that are particularly relevant to why is it important to surface them instead and talk about them.
Well, Antimo, I love to hear Adri talking about all this. That's the first thing I just want to say. But I think that we still tend to empower rational and logical narratives more than what is non-rational or non-logical. And here comes what we can call the periphery way of thinking. Like just today I was talking in a group about how Brazilian, and if I might say African cultures, we are oral cultures, and therefore we are not recognized in the mainstream of any kind of academic thinking or scholar thinking. And I think we can see this in the intercultural field. We are always trying to speak European and American words or way of thinking, so we are understood, so we are recognized. For instance, PhDs or academic titles. And this is something that I had to fight myself in Brazil, because I wanted to be graduated in Brazilian schools. I could have opportunities to go and had my education abroad, but then what am I talking about? Brazilian schools, aren't they good? don't they offer enough knowledge to their students? And so I think the rational thinking might be one of the narratives that silences more other narratives in the world. And not only the rational thinking, but mostly the binary rational thinking. And binary rational thinking is something very much from Europe and the United States. And I think now that we have to deal with Asia, we are starting to rethink that. And from the Latin American point of view, what a shame for us Latin Americans, because we needed to wait for the Asians to become political power, so we are being more recognized. So
isn't that interesting though? We've been talking for 30, 40 years about all of this, you know, communication styles, high context, circular styles, and all of this binary rational thinking that you're addressing keeps on still being very pervasive. And yet in the field of intercultural communication, we often speak about the importance of tolerance of ambiguity. So if you're thinking that there is something ambiguous going on, we're also taught to pause and listen. And then the other thing that I will say is, one, we talk a lot about curiosity and opening up your horizon to listen to people's stories. And in the corporate field in particular, especially in North America, the buzzword has been for several years now, stories, authenticity and stories. But we don't silence our own binary thinking, rational thinking enough to hear those stories. We are speaking all the time, right? So this is, I think, a shift that we absolutely have to do, because it takes us from that going from the mind to embodied more, that connection, that it's about feeling one another, not listening simply about one another.
I would just add not only the body dimension, but I would, if I can say the word, the soul dimension. Adri and I, we always talk about the vibe, the energy that goes in the Brazilian conversation. And I don't think it is about body language. I think it is about some kind of spiritual language or soul language that is so hard to understand if you're not really open to that. And that's a very silent the narrative, because I can barely never use this in the intercultural field. Now I'm very happy that I can use this with Adri in our dialogues, but besides Adri, it's so hard to find someone who accepts my soul and and spiritual energy as knowledge.
Yeah, and yet, you know, it's also interesting that we know already that the biggest chunk of message is within the nonverbal. And yet we still seem to have problems connected into those nuances of nonverbal language. I'd love to hear from Marcia of how this ties into also the Native American culture side.
Well, you know, not only for the Native American side, but I think, you know, and I want to just expand this in general too, is, you know, we're at a point in history right now where a lot of systems are getting questioned, right? Our educational systems, who's holding the knowledge, how is that knowledge being passed down? And something that really strikes me right now is that, you know, really we have the knowledge within ourselves already for what we need to do, right? Culture is a full body experience, you know, I like to say, and we carry our lineages within us, you know, both the resilience and the challenges. And it's really up to us in each moment to live our truth within that, but also to feel the validity of sharing that with others as a learning experience, right? So, you know, in that I probably believe, you know, as I'm saying, it is a very indigenous, very Native American perspective in terms of, you know, generations past and generations coming. You know, our responsibility isn't just to the here and now, it is a 360-degree view, right? And, you know, again, the self-validation, kind of the inner work that we need to do around that is extremely important, because any kind of intercultural shift, any kind of understanding, any kind of experience around that is relational. That's really where it starts. It's not in how many books you're reading. It's almost not even important how many countries you've traveled to. It's really, who are you in relationship with? Because if all of us are honest about it, and we all have shared that, the spark that got us going down this path came from relationships, came from being in contact with somebody that meant something to us that was completely different than who we were. You know, when I would go down to Brazil, I didn't speak Portuguese. My mom did not bring us up speaking Portuguese. But my relatives, my family, the love that I felt, the nonverbal side of that equation, made me feel like it was home, you know? Same thing when I go to, you know, my pueblo, to my tribe, you know, my brother and his family live there. It's home, you know, and they're two completely different places, and yet they both live within me, right? That's the experience that I needed to know is valid as much as any theory or any book or any class that I'm taking.
Yeah. Yeah, it's validating that internal, what I call the internal multisensory matrix that we all have. Thoughts that are secondary to emotions. We feel something that makes us react and say something, and yet we want to think that it's the other way around. So we have a few more minutes, and I think one question that I'd like to pose to Mariana as well is, so we know that having this kind of dialogues about silence narratives is very difficult and challenging. What do you think are those challenges? Why it is so challenging still today to surface certain narratives?
Well, I think the first biggest challenge is for the person who has been silent for their entire life to be empowered to trust their own narratives. And coming from a colonized country, I think that's the biggest challenge we have in our country. How do we trust ourselves? Because the narrative that we have always heard is that we were not trustful or not to be trusted. And so I would think this is the biggest challenge. How do we empower people to trust their identities so much that they can fight for their identities? And here I think that something that really changed my life, and I'll be very stereotypical here, is that I lived as a young person in France. And in France, I learned to be a little bit arrogant or a little bit fier, ter orgulho of myself. But I do not see that much in Brazilian people. So I say that the international experience in a central or in a mainstream country enabled me to nowadays fight for my identities. So how do we empower people so they can fight for their identities?
Yeah, and it takes also leadership that validates that very point, right? Instead of continuing to fit into a box that gets us somewhere. And right now, in executive leadership, I think the key word more than ever, it's courage. If you believe something wholeheartedly, you have to stand up and do it and say it and do it and be congruent with your values. Because ultimately, if you earned that leadership position, it's because people saw something in you. They saw the ability you had. But finally, you have to dig into yourself and say, am I congruent with the world, where the world is going, with my values? What is the bigger purpose in life? Am I living a life of purpose or not, right? So it's a rich conversation, of course, and having 45 minutes, it's not going to cut it to go deeper, to explore other hidden narratives and silence narratives. We are barely scratching the surface. And we hope that this has made people want to know more. And for sure, I hope that people have had the time to think about a couple of questions. We do have a few minutes that we can address some questions in this live. So I'm waiting for them to come through the screen and pose them to you. But if you have anything else to contribute to this conversation, either Adrienne or Marcia, please, by all means.
Yeah, well, while people are thinking of questions too, I would just add to that creative process and the leadership that you're talking about, Antimo, within the intercultural community, that it's so important to have that flexible mindset with growth. And for me, there's a big piece of identity that I can't separate having a global mindset with, for me, having a queer mindset, because both parts of my identity have given me the ability to constantly be flexible and face challenges to my core values, be willing to see from other perspectives, but also be very assured of where I stand for myself, so that I can stay grounded doing my own intercultural work and also understanding others' positionalities. So I think that's a key piece when we're talking about empowerment. It's I see our work and who we are as transformative, and it has to start with ourselves, starting with the inside out, and have that ripple effect with the others that we live with the others that we work with and that we're in community with. So it is, as you mentioned, Marcia, very relational, very connected. That's how we build really authentic global connections.
And we have to have the courage to share our stories, because sometimes we either have a sense of shame, or I'm not feeling so worthy, or feeling that my story is too complicated, who want to listen to it. But it's sharing those stories. And I will bring up the one aspect of identity and silenced narrative that I was hinting at the beginning, the one of an immigrant. Here I am with a master's degree in intercultural relations, having had a completely different walk of life prior to getting to the US. I don't want to brag about me, but I have so many passions that translates into talent that I love to express. And one question has just arrived, and as soon as I finished, send me that question again, and I will pose it to people. I want to just make this a little point. I think immigrants, when we stop and think about it, have a very complex life. And mine has been complex, but nothing compared to other people who, for instance, I just met a woman from Mozambique, and she and her family had to flee to Malawi, and from Malawi to another neighboring country, until it was so bad that she finally came to the United States. Who are we to have all kinds of stereotypes and judgment about immigrants, no matter what country you live in, if we haven't taken the time to listen to their stories that are break your heart, that you haven't had a tiny fraction of that pain in your life? And so those are the narratives that we should encourage immigrants to share, so that we get in touch with their reality, with their struggle, and start validating their experience and their contribution. Because if we just see them as immigrant all the time, we pay them less, we do this, we don't include them in leadership, we do that, they're never going to have a voice, and never is going to be, they're not going to be validated, right? And so it's both ways. The leadership has to validate them, and we have to step up to the plate with courage and say, I have a story. Actually, no one has one story. No one. We have all multiple stories to share. So I welcome that question again, so that I can tap on to the phone and read it to you guys. Let's see, it's coming. There was one question, I know. If you guys are seeing before I do, please feel free. Okay, so I would love it if somebody could speak to feeling rejected by groups that you identify with, and how you have dealt with that. That's a wonderful question. I'm pretty sure we've all had that. So again, speak to the feeling of being rejected by a group that we identify with, and how you've dealt with that.
I'd love to tackle that one. that has happened throughout my life. You know, the first thing is, you know, allowing the emotion to come up. That's the, you know, there's grief, there's sadness, there's confusion. There's an expectation, you know, if I've had expectations that because I am part of this group, that I will be accepted as part of this group. And when that doesn't happen, that's painful, right? And the important part of the process for that is also starting to build an understanding as to the reasons behind the rejection. Some of it can be relational, you know, some of it can be part of that hidden narrative. You know, if I'm not speaking the language, there's a sense of rejection from that because I'm not understanding what's going on and other folks aren't understanding me. So that's already a barrier. I'll speak to, you know, a concept called lateral, you know, oppression, lateral, I don't like to use the word violence, but lateral oppression between groups that are marginalized communities in countries because of the prejudice and the racism that's being experienced from a dominant culture. Sometimes within groups, those same beliefs will get enacted towards each other. So the question of enoughness comes up quite a bit. You know, are you Native enough? Are you African American enough? Are you this enough? Are you American? You know, all of those things. And within that, that's a separation. You know, that's a gulf that most folks don't know how to cross because there is no answer to the enoughness. So I think, you know, my response to that would be, you know, not stepping away from what the emotional impact of that is, and then maybe a stepping towards of understanding the context for where the rejection is taking place and your place in it or your place not in it, because not all of it is up to you.
Thank you for sharing that, Marcia. Mariana, do you have something else to add?
You know, I'd never thought about that. That's a great question. Being rejected for groups you identify with. So I would come back to the question, why do I identify with those groups? Isn't there something that is maybe I am silencing some narratives in myself that are making me identify with something that tends to reject me? And sorry for going to psychoanalytical here. So no, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer for that. Every time I feel reject, I try to understand why am I trying to be accepted for people who reject me, and this is my way out. I'm sorry.
No, I sort of agree with you. I was thinking about my own story, and I don't want to necessarily verbalize the details here, but as a gay man, I've struggled and continue to struggle with the gay community here in Portland, Oregon. There isn't a truthful, embracing, warm, compassionate sense of acceptance and belonging. There isn't. 25 years here, I haven't felt it. And I hope people honor the fact that it's coming from my heart, that feeling, that it's not just a judgment. In the gay culture, especially gay male, we tend to be very exclusionary of people that are not at your level of wealth. And people may say, oh, that's not true. Well, trust me. I've been around the block enough in 25 years that it's been my experience where I was included for a little bit, but if certain things didn't match up to their level of wealth or lifestyle, I was quickly forgotten. So, and to get to your point, I'm sorry, I'm not going to feed into the rejection. I'm going to actually see, you know what? I don't belong. They don't add anything to my life. They don't add value. I'm going to take myself off of it and still be who I am. So no need to point the finger or fix anything, because the answer is within yourself. Just move away and develop your yummy, happy life somewhere else with somebody else. It's with another group. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add? We are almost 2-3 minutes before the hour. I know we've had a little bit delay.
Well, I believe there is a nice question to Adri here that will put you in a very hard spot, Adri. Adri. So someone invited is thanking you for the invitation. And have any of you experienced change in the kind of quantity of interest in the intercultural issues since Trump and Bolsonaro have come on the scene? Go for that, Adri.
Yes, so great question. Thank you for it. I wish we could say that we had seen an increase in interest because of the political figures in power in our respective countries. And I'm afraid to say I don't think that we can equate the two. But what I will say that I've noticed in Brazil, at least, is that having Bolsonaro in power and having such a, having it be much more of a polar, bipolar view or more extreme views being present, I think certain issues people are willing to talk about in Brazil that perhaps beforehand got pushed under the rug. And now there are issues that are about inequality and about racism and about structural problems that are really getting a lot more attention because they're absolutely in your face. You cannot ignore them anymore. And so it's happening in different ways that is happening in the US under Trump's leadership. However, I see the kind of general increase in the level of conversations to be optimistic, and that we try to provoke people a bit in our trainings by really posing some numbers about structural inequality in Brazil in particular, and asking our workshop participants, if you look at a socioeconomic income pyramid, where do you all fall? And they, most of them all fall at the top because we're giving corporate level trainings. And so we talk about social change in that way. Where does change come from? Is it really all accountability with the government? Who runs the government here? So there's that. I will say we've been, I encouraged to continue that, to provoke that accountability question. And I wish we had even more interest because of our respective presidents, but that's how I would answer.
Well, thank you everyone for your contribution. Thanks. That was beautifully said, Adrienne. And the answer and the insights are in the word leadership, or lack thereof. So who is a leader? A leader is somebody that looks to lead others from a place of compassion. And if compassion isn't part of the equation, then you may need to question the leadership. And so we are living in very interesting times. Definitely we're seeing a lot of polarization, but at the same time, there are enough people that are talking about other things like we did today. We surfaced something that hasn't been the mainstream talk on social media or around the news or anywhere. So we hope that we've inspired you, more of you, to have this kind of conversation. Just pull out the drawer and see what's underneath those stocks that haven't been taken to the top for a long time. Bring out those conversations that need to be had, and those narratives that need to be brought to the surface. So I want to thank you, everybody who connected. This was very exciting. Apologies for the brief delay in starting. Muito obrigado a vocês todos no Brasil para se conectar. And please write us. You have the details on Differance and Cultural Global Labs if you have other questions. Even if some of you would like us to present on certain things, we have definitely enough colleagues in our network that we can bring to you interesting lives and chats. So thank you everyone on the panel for being with us. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Mariana. And thank you, Marcia. Obrigado. Do coração.
A gente que agradece o convite, foi um grande prazer, Antimo, Márcia, prazer conhecer vocês, prazer fazer essa live com vocês. E como a gente diz no Brasil, estamos juntos aí
Estamos juntos.
por um mundo de menos narrativas silenciadas. Beijo a todos,
we're all
obrigada,
together.
pessoal.
Beijos.
Muito
Tchau.
obrigada a todos.
Tchau.
Muito
Bye
obrigada
bye.
a todos. Tchau.
Tchau.